Good evening. Viewers who have followed our series of historical sketches on the history of Italy in the First Millennium may wonder why I dedicate this episode to Islam. Now, there is a general idea that Islam had an influence on European history and culture. How much, however, cannot be covered at school. Understandably so, because we could dedicate another 10 or more historical sketches to treat the subject and yet would remain very incomplete. And I will begin this episode talking about an abbey in Italy, the Abbey of Vezzolano in northwest Italy, somewhat out of the beaten track of popular tourism. The abbey was founded in the lower Middle Ages around the year 1000, when that area was ruled by a Longobards king, and we talked about Longobards kings before. I bring to your attention an apparently small detail in the facade of the abbey, namely the cup. The script in the cup, as you see in the picture, is in Arabic, and it repeats several times all around the name of Allah Muhammad. Probably the artist-decorator did not know Arabic, but he thought, as I and many others do, that the Arabic script is highly decorative irrespective of what it says. There are other instances of the same use of Arabic script in Christian artifacts, in churches and abbeys in Italy. And since we started with a reference to architecture, the pointed arch, which we usually associate with the Gothic style, is also derived from Islamic architecture. This example is from a square in the city of Fabriano, and as well as the pointed spires of Gothic cathedrals, and as in this example from the Cathedral of Milan, are the architectural daughters of Islamic minarets, including the spire of Notre Dame in Paris that was burned last year, though it was a 19th century addition by the architect Viollet-le-Duc. And now to a brief survey of how it came about that out of Saudi Arabia, that even today still keeps laws, traditions and customs almost as old as Muhammad himself, came out a religion, an ideology and civilization that so much influenced the culture of the Western Europe, especially in Mediterranean countries, including Italy. Until the 6th century AD, the Arabic Peninsula had remained insulated from any influence from the outside world. Its name, Arab, means arid, unimaginably dry. The Romans tried to penetrate it but gave up, mainly because of the climate. The Greeks didn't explore it either, but left to the European language the term Saracens, meaning men of the East, a synonym of Muslims. Arabs lived in tribes, often killing each other for the possession of a water well, and when they died, they tied their camel to their tomb so that the camel would transport them into a paradise full of women, horses, and brawls. And even before Muhammad, Mecca was the most important center of the peninsula, a station for the caravans that went from Egypt to India. In Mecca, the two major features were transport companies based on camels, of course, and the Kaaba. Kaaba means cube, and in the corner of this cube there is a famous black stone, which is actually reddish in color, probably a meteorite. Before Muhammad, the Kaaba also contained many other idols, each representing a god. One of them was called Allah, being the most important, for belonging to a powerful tribe that adopted it as their patron. This tribe, in turn, split into two factions, and eventually the leader of the Hashemite faction, as it was called, married Amina, who gave birth to a boy who was named Muhammad, which means highly praised. Muhammad lost father and mother when very young and was raised by his grandfather, who taught him everything except reading and writing, which did not prevent Muhammad from composing the most well-known and poetic book written in Arabic, the Quran, which means reading or discourse. I say composed because it was put together by one of his successors called Abu Bakr and some of Muhammad's companions who remember perfectly what Muhammad had said. These fragments were assembled and into a manuscript completed in 651 AD. Abu Bakr was actually the father-in-law of Muhammad because Muhammad married Abu Bakr's daughter called Aisha. Aisha was one of Muhammad's last wives, the first having been a rich widow called Khadija, who was 15 years his senior when he married her at the age of 25. Khadija was a good choice, both sentimentally and materially, for she supported him through the difficulties he encountered along his path towards becoming a prophet. She gave him a daughter, Fatima, destined to become famous in the Muslim world. But what triggered religious interest in Muhammad were actually the Christians and the Jews who lived in Mecca and Medina. Muhammad found attractive that these religions had only one God who revealed his laws via a sacred book. Already some Arabs had formed a sect that rejected the idolatry embodied in the Kaaba, the cube, and perhaps we could say the prophets are born when they are waited for. It took a while for Muhammad to realize that he was a prophet, not until he was about 40 years old. It was then, while sleeping in a mountain cave, that the archangel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad, asking him to read a message embroidered on a decorated fabric. Now Muhammad could not read, but the archangel repeated the message several times, and on waking up, Muhammad remembered the message, which said, "Muhammad, you are the messenger of Allah and I am Gabriel." From the day onward, Muhammad began receiving other messages from Gabriel and asked how he could remember them. Muhammad replied that Gabriel made him repeat these messages so many times until they were fixed. They were fixed in Muhammad's memory. Muhammad found it difficult to eradicate idolatry from his countrymen. Eventually, he succeeded in converting a notable, wealthy merchant called Abu Bakr, later one of the compilers of the Quran. And the conversion of Abu Bakr turned the tide in Muhammad's favor. Still, there were difficulties and resistance, particularly because the new religion was against enslavement, and this disturbed the local economy based on slavery. Muhammad and his followers thought of moving to the city of Taif, but Taif said no for fear of disagreement with Mecca. Then, one night, Muhammad dreamed of finding himself in Jerusalem, where a white and winged horse conducted him to heaven. The legend of this imaginary flight is what makes Jerusalem one of the three holy cities of the Islamic religion, along with Mecca and Medina, of course. Jerusalem, of course, also being already a holy city for Christians and Jews. Why Medina? This again reflects the difficulties Muhammad found in Mecca when promoting his new monotheistic faith. Whereupon Muhammad and followers escaped to Medina on July 16, 622 AD. That flight in Arabic is called Hejira, and for his followers that date is the equivalent of Christmas for the Christians. The inhabitant of Medina welcomed Muhammad enthusiastically, and everybody wanted to host him. But he said, "Let the camel decide. Where he stops, I will." The camel found a nice place where Muhammad fixed his abode and built his first mosque. On its completion, he inaugurated it by dictating a very simple prayer. He went to the pulpit, rose to the pulpit, and said loudly, "Allah is great, Allah Akbar." Then he came down and prostrated himself 3 times in the direction of Jerusalem. And these 3 prostrations became, from that day onwards, an iconic image of Islamic prayer. The word Islam means peace or abandonment in God. And this was the ritual to be followed whether in a mosque or wherever the faithful happened to be. He called them Muslims, which means those who have made peace with God. Then Muhammad managed to concentrate on himself both the civil and the administrative power in Medina. This was to remain a characteristic of Islam that sees one person holding both temporal and spiritual power, a bit like the Catholic Pope. Events evolved quickly, and in a memorable battle, the forces of Muhammad defeated those of Mecca, who were increasingly concerned that Muhammad's faith was spreading, which would hurt, as I said before, their slave trade. Muhammad defeated them, attributing to Allah all the merit of the victory. Fortified by the success, he installed a somewhat arbitrary regime, broke with the Jews, and isolated them into a specific quarter, just like it would happen in Europe later. The Jewish quarter of Venice was called ghetto, a term that migrated from Venice into other European languages. After Muhammad's victory in Mecca, the three prostrations during prayers were to be made in the direction of Mecca rather than Jerusalem. Muhammad died in 632 AD in the arms of perhaps his favorite wife Aisha. Though I just barely touched the surface of the surface, some key historic points concerning the birth of Islam may help us frame one of the natural questions surrounding the spread of Islam then and its lingering and lasting presence as one of the main world religions today. Given that all large historical movements have at their origin in an ideology, and given also that the beginning of Islam were fortuitous, and finally, given also that unlike Christianity, Islam had no history behind itself, what converted this brand new religion into an immense force, not only military, but also artistical, cultural, philosophical, scientific, and technical, to the point of transforming the Middle East, parts of Africa, Persia, Central Asia, India, Spain, and even Italy, into a distinct world shaped by the Muslim religion. This until in Europe, they were stopped in 732 AD by Charles Martel in France. We should not forget that a few hundred years later, Turkey put an end to the Eastern Roman Empire in 1452, and Turkey overran the Balkans and went as far as Vienna, where they were blocked in 1683 by John III Sobieski, a Polish leader who had allied himself with the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, founded by Charlemagne, as we saw in previous episodes. Muhammad said that Allah was the only God not only the God of the Arabs, but of everyone, and the Arabs had a particular duty to convert as many people as they could, not forcibly though. There were no sanctions as today when ethical starvation and humanitarian bombing affect countries that refuse the doctrine of globalization and neoliberal capitalism. Muhammad said, treat them with kindness, and if they turn their back on you, continue to exhort them without offending or hurting them. With this philosophy, he managed to convert previous bands of robbers into an army and gave them an alibi for their aggression. But this is not enough to explain their success. Muhammad left no testament or successor, but all pointed to Abu Bakr, his father-in-law, whom we met earlier and who had replaced Muhammad in the mosque at Mecca. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire was showing weakness, and some Arabic tribes in Syria asked the help of Abu Bakr, who sent them his most valiant general Khalid. The Syrian Arabs accepted the Quran in mass. If we are to believe the chronicles or the chroniclers of the time, they particularly liked the Muslim paradise, seen as an immense and limitless harem. In the battle at the city of Firaz, Khalid defeated the superior forces of the Byzantine Empire, of the Byzantine emperor called Heraclion, and all Mesopotamia became Muslim land. Abu Bakr, the first successor of Muhammad, was in turn succeeded by Omar, under whose rule the undefeated general Khalid reached and occupied Jerusalem, where he established good relations with the Christian community. Omar also ordered the construction of the famous Omar Mosque, but he still left the capital of the Muslim world at Mecca. The first successions to Muhammad were turbulent. Omar was killed and was succeeded by Ali, an adopted son of Muhammad. In turn, Ali himself was killed, and the split between Shia and Sunni arose from the death of Ali, whom the Shia began venerating as the real heir of Muhammad. His tomb in the city of Eufa or Yufa is for the Shia what the Kaaba is in Mecca for the Sunni. After Ali, the successor of Muhammad was Muawiyah, during whose leadership the Muslim civilization began its age of cultural and military expansion that lasted for about 600 years. I spent some time on the beginning of Islam to show its contrast, the abyss actually, between the almost barbaric beginning of the Arabic civilization and its remarkable and historically rapid development. And though Muslim civilizations and religion are, as we know, enduring features of our tormented world, it is remarkable how the flourishing of Islam came to a sudden stop about 600 years later. I will touch briefly later on the reasons why this happened. The impulse to the flowering and development of Muslim culture and civilization began when the Arabs conquered Damascus, where they were exposed to the culture of the Byzantine Empire, whose geographical extent also included a good part of the Middle East. Two things happened simultaneously. Islam became a popular religion in the newly conquered land, and primarily for two reasons. One, its liturgy was simple. For all you had to do was to remember a few lines, as we saw, and this has endured to this day, and is shown in its extreme form, if you like, by the chant of self-exploding martyrs before they blow themselves up. Allah Akbar, Allah is great. I do not want to pursue this line, though, because I believe that terrorism, as we know it, is or was a phenomenon induced and purposely created by the not-so-hidden forces that rule the West for more diabolic purposes than are commonly known in the official narrative. The second reason for the Islamic success was practical. The Byzantine administration had become immensely bureaucratic, hence inherently burdensome, especially on taxes. The newly conquered land and people, conquered by Islam that is, abounded in professors and scientists who brought the new faith all the cultural weight of Christian and Greek civilization, that is, 600 years of Christian and about 1,000 years of Greek culture. This aggregate of culture, we may say, was far superior to what happened in the western branch of the Roman Empire, Italy and the rest of Europe, lands where they were lands overrun by people of the north known as barbarians. So-called barbarians, by the way, because they certainly did not speak Latin or Greek, and therefore when they spoke, they sounded like bar, hence barbarians. In fact, as an aside, we know that the expression blah blah blah, used as a signal that the listener does not respect what the speaker said or is saying and has ceased to listen. This expression has its roots in the ancient mode of describing how the barbarians spoke. Now, in Italy and in the West at large, Latin and Greek science, literature and culture also only survived in the documents that the Benedictine monks, as we saw in previous episodes, managed to save in their convents. But the West as a whole had forgotten all this because there were no schools where to know and learn about the past. But this was not so in Byzantium. There was a spare the barbaric invasions. The empire maintained, developed, and expanded Greek, Latin, Christian culture in all her lands, including those suddenly occupied by the Arabs. The Arabs were immediately fascinated by the incredible, to them, treasure of science, literature, and philosophy embedded in the Greek Christian civilization. The classics were translated into Arabic, and in this the Jews contributed significantly, as they, meaning the Jews, were already infiltrated in Arabic lands and were a party with whom Muhammad himself had to deal with. Yet, the Arabs were not only passive absorbers of pre-existing cultural and scientific developments, they were contributors as well. In mathematics, for example, they invented the zero. And as a simple and intuitive the idea seems to us, the zero did not exist among the Romans and the Greeks, and without the zero, mathematics would be more difficult than it is already, for some anyway. Algebra was equally an Arabic invention from the Arabic al-Jabr, and so is the Alembic from al-Ambik. And in Damascus, in 709 AD, they founded the first proper hospital where anesthesia was scientifically developed as a form of treatment. Two Muslim physicians contributed to expand the realm of medicine and bringing it to a remarkable height for the age. The Persian Ruazes compiled a medical treatise in 20 volumes. The other physician was the equally Persian Avicenna, in Arabic Ibn Sina. Avicenna's book, The Book of Healing, a philosophical and scientific encyclopedia, as well as his other book, The Canon of Medicine, is a medical encyclopedia, became a standard medical text at many medieval universities until as late as 1650 AD. In Sicily, the Arabs arrived following a color revolution by sundry rebels of the city of Syracuse, who rejected the rule by the government of Byzantium, whereupon the Emir Ziyadat Allah I, starting from about where Tunisia is today, landed in Marsala, Sicily, and proceeded to the total conquest of the island. The Sicilians welcomed the Arabs, for they were unhappy with the taxes imposed by Byzantium, though the Arabs turned out to be as exacting as the Byzantines. Nevertheless, Palermo became the beacon of the extraordinary power of the Islamic message. Arabic costumes quickly took root among the local people. The first cultural revolution was in architecture, both sacred with mosques and minarets, and profane, including the Arabic custom of building houses with an open-air courtyard in the middle for outdoor dining or just lounging. But there were other additions besides medicine and architecture. Food, for example, rice, cotton, sugarcane, peaches, dates, asparagus, spinaches, pepper, grapefruits were all nutritional innovations, as we would say today, that were introduced in Islamic Europe by the invaders. To be fair, comparing the invasion of Islam from the south with the invasions of Europe from the north with the barbarians, the Islamic invasion was the milder of the two and, above all, the most fertile in bringing along a dramatic, we could almost say, dramatic fertilizing effect on the general culture and even lifestyle of the south of Italy, in Spain, and in Europe at large. Even Dante, the Shakespeare of Italy as far as language is concerned, was influenced by Islamic culture. Though Dante placed Muhammad in hell, the structure of the poem, the architecture of heaven, of purgatory, and of hell, mirrors the structure of a collection of Islamic books called the Books of the Stairs. This book tells about the ascension of Muhammad to the Islamic heaven and in the nearness of Allah himself. 250 years rather, of Arabic domination left a strong imprint in Sicily. In 900 AD, schools were established in Palermo, where it was taught that the earth was round and it had a center equidistant from the four cardinal points. Whereas there is some controversy on whether the Christian West accepted or not the rotundity of the earth until much later. Islam penetrated also across the strait that divides Sicily from the rest of Italy. Bari, for example, was for a few decades a dependence of the Caliphate of Baghdad, of all places. Historians have debated why the Islamic civilization that so much contributed to the cultural development of Western Europe relatively quickly reverted, we could say, to a more fundamentalist and therefore regressive view of the world, as all fundamentalisms unfortunately are. Among all possible reasons, I choose a cultural battle that occurred among key Arabic intellectuals around the year 1000, the result of which battle set the tone for the Islamic cultures of the next centuries. A bit like the 1968 so-called student revolution, which, instead of promoting peace and social justice, ended up with the practical promotion of personal ethical anarchy, eventually resolving in today's extreme form of techno-turbo capitalism, financial engineering, and forced promotion of globalization and of the so-called end of history. Very briefly, as a consequence of the influence of Greek culture on Islam, there grew a school of thought called in Arabic kalam, roughly meaning science of discourse. One of its famous exponents was Al-Farabi, philosopher and jurist, who, among other things, attempted to reconcile Aristotle with Islam, just like St. Thomas Aquinas attempted to reconcile Aristotle with Christianity. Against the school of Al-Farabi stood Muhammad Ghazali, who demonstrated, I'm crudely summarizing because the issue is really quite intricate, demonstrated that Kalam was incompatible with Sharia, that is, with the Islamic law. Ghazali wrote a book called The Deliverer from Error, a manual for liberating Islam from the nefarious influence of Greek westernizing culture. Who knows what Islam would be without Ghazali? But in history, as you know, ifs do not count. If the Zionists had not taken down President Jimmy Carter, we would not have had a Reagan. And if Al Gore had resigned as vice president after Clinton so shamelessly lied to the nation, Al Gore would have been president, and there would not have been a war in Iraq with 4,000 American soldiers dead and 1 million Iraqis making the same end. Thank you for watching. Until next time, I am Jimmy Molia for Historical Sketches. Good night.